A federal judge has ordered the administration to begin refunding $130 billion worth of tariffs. Lydia Hu's been following the story. OK, Lydia, how many companies have filed lawsuits to get their money back?
Stuart, thousands.
Thousands?
By counts, it's more than 2,000 companies that have filed their lawsuits, according to reports. We were talking about big business, Costco, FedEx, Pandora, and they're looking to benefit from the tariff challenges that were initiated. Remember, it was the small businesses who filed the lawsuits. Now the big businesses are lining up to get their money back as well. The judge's order is coming after the Supreme Court invalidated some of President Trump's tariff powers just last month. And this order directs U.S. Customs and Border Protection to begin recalculating duties that importers paid and determine how much money needs to be returned. Now, on top of returning the tariffs to be paid, the estimates range, as you said, from $130 billion upwards of $175 billion.
Hello, buddies. Adam is here. So this is happening right now inside a federal courtroom. Trump completely lost control, screaming radical lunatic and witch hunt at the judge after she looked him in the eye and delivered 6 words that destroyed his entire legal strategy. You are not above the law. Here's what led to this explosion. Trump had been facing serious allegations tied to documents he allegedly ignored court orders about.
The Supreme Court, including the president's appointees, have declared that he is not above the law. The path that the Supreme Court has laid out is one that is clearly achievable by us in the lower court, and we will continue to go down that path.
National Guard matters. Things that shouldn't even be controversial if you're actually following the law like a normal person. But Trump did what Trump always does. He appealed. Then he appealed again. Then he filed what's called an emergency appeal, a last-second legal Hail Mary designed to buy more time, to delay consequences, to keep the legal system tied in knots until something changed.
The Federal Circuit Court of Appeals today denying the Trump administration's request to delay next steps in the tariff refund process. NTD's Arlene Richards has more.
In a blow to the Trump administration on Monday, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit has sent the tariff case back to a lower court for further proceedings on refunds. The decision, written in a one-page order, denies the government's request that an existing pause be extended for at least 4 months. The court didn't give an explanation for the ruling. The plaintiffs, a group of small businesses, had urged the court to move the case along so they could pursue their refunds. The ruling comes after the Supreme Court's lengthy and complicated opinion 2 weeks ago, in which it ruled that President Trump couldn't use an emergency powers law to impose sweeping global tariffs. The highest court left open the option to impose tariffs under different laws, which Trump has already begun using. And as for the refunds,
they take months and months to write an opinion, and they don't even discuss that point.
For a while, that strategy actually sort of worked. Or at least it delayed things enough to buy time. There were appeals filed in different courts. There were complicated arguments about jurisdiction. There were questions about whether certain things even qualified as contempt under the law. There were actual legal arguments being made, not just Trump yelling about witch hunts. But then the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals spoke, and they didn't just reject the appeal. They made it absolutely clear that this was over.
A multi-billion-dollar setback for the Trump administration this afternoon.
A federal judge has cleared the way for thousands of businesses to receive refunds for those tariffs. Fox business correspondent Lydia Hu has the details.
Federal judge has ordered the administration to begin refunding billions of dollars in tariffs. More than 2,000 companies have filed lawsuits seeking refunds, according to reports, and many of them are big businesses like Costco and FedEx looking to benefit from the tariff challenges initiated by small businesses. The federal judge's order comes after the Supreme Court invalidated some of Trump's tariff powers last month. The order directs U.S. Customs and Border Protection to begin recalculating duties importers paid and determine exactly how much money needs to be returned.
No more games. That language was pointed and direct. The ruling was final and binding. This wasn't some radical judge making some crazy, unprecedented decision out of nowhere. This was a federal court in Washington applying straightforward legal principles that have existed for centuries. You ignore a court order, there are consequences. You don't get special treatment because of who you are. That's basic law. That's how it's supposed to work in America. And that's when Trump lost it completely. He stood up. He pointed at the judge. He started screaming about bias and witch hunts and radical judges and everything being rigged against him.
Others think they're being politically correct, which has happened before far too often with certain members of this court. And it's happened so often with this court. What a shame. Having to do with voting in particular. When in fact they're just being fools and lapdogs for the rhinos and the radical left Democrats, and not that this should have anything at all to do with it. They're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. It's my opinion that the court has been swayed by foreign interests and a political movement that is far smaller than people would ever think. It's a small movement. I won by millions of votes. We won in a landslide. With all the cheating that went on, there was a lot of it, but we still won in a landslide. Too big to rig. But these people are obnoxious, ignorant, and loud. They're very loud.
The courtroom went silent. People were thinking, are you kidding me? Is this actually happening? A sitting president literally having a complete meltdown in federal court, screaming at a judge, pointing, losing his mind. And then he either stormed out or security removed him, depending on which report you read. Either way, he had to leave. He couldn't stay in the courtroom because he couldn't control himself anymore. Now here's why this specific moment matters so much and changes everything going forward. This wasn't some minor ruling that gets appealed again and again through different courts and different judges. This was the final appeal, the last legal tool in his entire toolkit. Once this got rejected by the D.C. Circuit, there were no more delays available, no more delay tactics he could deploy, no more appeals he could file to buy more time. This was it. This was the end of that strategy. And what that means, practically speaking, is that everything is moving incredibly fast now. Everything is accelerating. We're talking about impeachment proceedings that are about to kick into overdrive and actually move. We're talking about the 25th Amendment being back on the table as a serious discussion. We're talking about criminal penalties, including actual potential incarceration, moving from something theoretical and distant to something that's happening right now in reality. The D.C. Circuit Court had also just blocked an immigration appeals overhaul that Trump's team tried to push through very recently. That happened literally hours before it was supposed to take effect. They were actually trying to change the rules in real time, and the court said, nope, that's not happening. There's a clear pattern emerging here. The pattern is crystal clear to anyone paying attention. Trump's legal strategy is dead. He's completely out of appeals. He's out of delay tactics. He's out of tricks. So now Congress is actually moving. Republicans are starting to panic because they're beginning to realize this guy is actually facing real legal consequences. And when a sitting president is facing contempt charges, criminal penalties, and actual impeachment proceedings, yeah, that's a massive problem for your whole political party. The recordings that came out earlier, the ones with Trump and his advisors having conversations about what they're doing, those are part of this larger picture. The Bondi scandal with the Epstein allegations, all part of it. The obstruction allegations and witness testimony, all part of the same comprehensive picture. This ruling didn't happen in some kind of vacuum or isolation. It's the culmination of months and months of Trump trying to manipulate the legal system, trying to ignore court orders that judges have issued, trying to treat himself as being above the law and not subject to the same rules as everyone else. And a federal judge finally said no to all of it. You are not above the law. Those 6 words just detonated everything that Trump's legal team had been building and planning. They ended the delays. They eliminated any remaining appeals. They forced a real confrontation with actual consequences that can't be pushed off or delayed anymore. And Trump screaming in that courtroom, having that complete meltdown, that was his response to finally facing reality. That was a guy who has never had to answer for anything, suddenly realizing that the system actually works, that judges can actually say no, that courts have real power and teeth. This is the moment when everything changes. This is where the legal fortress collapses completely. Now let me back up and look at the bigger picture, because this story is way bigger than just one judge's ruling in one courtroom. This is about a fundamental question that's been haunting this entire administration. Is the president actually above the law or not? For months and months, Trump's entire legal strategy has basically been banking on the answer being yes, that he is somehow exempt. That's what these contempt charges were fundamentally about. Trump allegedly violated court orders regarding documents that the government said he was required to turn over under the law. Documents that were super important to various ongoing investigations that the courts were overseeing. The National Guard stuff is part of it too. There are real allegations that Trump misused the National Guard for certain purposes. And when the court issued an order for him to provide information about that, his response was basically no. So you've got a judge saying, hey, we need this information. This is a court order. You have to comply. You don't get to decide if you want to follow this. And Trump's legal team basically responds, actually no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to comply. That's contempt. That's literally the charge. That's ignoring a direct court order that a judge has issued. Normally, when someone ignores a court order, there are consequences. You can be fined substantial amounts of money. You can be jailed. The court has the power to enforce its own orders. That's literally how the entire judicial system works. That's the foundation of the rule of law. But Trump's team was betting on something different. They were betting on appeals. They were betting on delays, stretching things out. They were betting on the idea that they could tie this up in court long enough that somehow something would change. Maybe a new judge would be sympathetic to their arguments. Maybe something political would shift and give them leverage. Maybe they could get enough legal technicalities stacked up that they could wiggle out of it. But then the D.C. Circuit happened, and the judge didn't just reject the appeal. The judge made it absolutely clear that this was over. No more games. That ruling was final and binding. And here's where it gets really important to understand. This wasn't some radical judge making some crazy, unprecedented decision out of nowhere. This was a federal court in Washington applying straightforward legal principles that have existed for centuries. You ignore a court order, there are consequences. You don't get special treatment because of who you are. That's basic law. That's how it's supposed to work in America. But Trump screaming, radical, lunatic, witch hunt, rigged, that's what happens when someone actually expects different rules. That's what happens when someone thinks they should be exempt from consequences that everyone else faces. The timing of all this is absolutely crucial to understand the full picture, because this ruling doesn't exist in isolation. It's happening while impeachment articles are being actively drafted by Congress. It's happening while the Bondi scandal is still exploding in real time with new revelations coming out. It's happening while recordings are literally coming out of Trump, talking to his advisors about obstruction tactics and what they're trying to do legally. Congress is looking at all of this happening simultaneously and thinking, okay, this guy is actually defying federal courts. This guy is actually ignoring judges and their orders. This is not just political noise anymore. This is not just campaign rhetoric or media drama. This is actual legal defiance of the judicial system. That's when the impeachment language starts getting really serious and concrete. Because what's impeachable? Abuse of power, high crimes and misdemeanors, obstruction of justice. And if Trump is actively ignoring court orders and defying judicial authority, yeah, that's all three of those things right there. That's everything that impeachment was designed to address. The 25th Amendment stuff becomes relevant too, because you've got legitimate concerns about fitness for office now. You've got a president having a complete meltdown in federal court in front of witnesses. You've got testimony from advisors potentially about what's really going on behind the scenes in the White House. And that all adds up to serious questions about whether this particular person should actually have control of the nuclear football or the military. The Bondi connection matters because she's the Attorney General right now. She's supposed to be enforcing laws. She's supposed to be upholding the Constitution. But she's wrapped up in the Epstein scandal. She's tied to advisor testimony about corruption. And now her boss, the president, is actively defying federal courts, while she's supposed to be the top law enforcement official upholding the rule of law. That's awkward. That's a serious problem for the whole administration, because the Attorney General can't effectively defend law and order when the president is openly breaking it. And the immigration ruling that came out just hours before it was supposed to take effect shows a much broader pattern emerging here. The courts are blocking Trump's moves. They're doing it consistently, over and over. They're doing it fast. This isn't some isolated incident that happened once. This is a system that's rejecting his entire approach to governance and policy. This is a pattern of courts saying no to his plans. So what does Trump do with all of this? What are his options? Well, he can't appeal the contempt ruling anymore. That door is closed. The final appeal has been rejected. He can't delay his way out of it anymore because that strategy is dead and exhausted. What he can do is prepare for the criminal consequences that are coming. Prepare for impeachment that's moving forward. Prepare for the 25th Amendment debate that's going to blow up Congress and dominate every conversation. And here's the thing that really matters and could shift everything politically going forward. His own party is going to be watching this very carefully. Because if Trump is actually going down in a massive legal disaster, a lot of Republicans are going to start thinking about their own political survival in their own seats. They're going to start wondering if it's worth defending a president who's openly defying federal courts and judges. That's where all the midterm pressure comes in. Because if this becomes about Republican fitness for governance, if voters start seeing the party defending contempt of court and obstruction of justice, that's electoral poison. That kills you with swing voters. The current polling actually shows something interesting happening already. Trump's favorability is already in decline. The recordings and scandals are taking a real toll on how people perceive him. And now you've got this legal collapse that makes him look not just unpopular, but actually lawless and above any rules. So you're looking at a scenario where impeachment becomes significantly more likely now, where the 25th Amendment conversation becomes serious instead of just theoretical, where actual policy basically grinds to a halt because Congress is too busy dealing with the president's legal freefall. That's the deep game here. That's why this specific ruling matters so much for the future. It's not just about contempt charges, it's about what happens to an entire administration when the legal system actually enforces consequences. Let me break down the real consequences. What comes next? What should you actually be watching for? Trump's appeals are over. Done, finished. No more court delays are available to him. That sounds simple when you say it out loud, but it changes absolutely everything about how fast things move from this point forward. Before this ruling, his legal team could say, okay, we'll appeal to the D.C. Circuit, then maybe try for the Supreme Court after that. That buys us time to maneuver. That delays everything. But now they can't say that anymore. The D.C. Circuit has spoken. The final appeal has been rejected. There is no next level. There is no higher court to appeal to. There is no more legal maneuvering that delays consequences. That means the contempt findings stick and they're final. The penalties move from theoretical and distant to actual and immediate. And we're not talking about fines that Trump can just write a check for and make go away. We're talking about potential jail time for a sitting president. We're talking about actual criminal consequences that are moving from discussion to reality. That's insane to even say out loud in normal political conversation. But here we are. That's the actual situation. This triggers the impeachment bomb. Congress has been quietly drafting articles for a while now. They've been waiting to see how the legal situation developed and where it was heading. Well, it's developed. The courts have spoken clearly. Trump is actively defying judicial authority. That's impeachable. That's the kind of article that gets put to a vote and that lawmakers can actually defend to their constituents. And here's where the Bondi scandal and the recordings matter so much right now, because now you've got corroborating evidence that goes beyond just this one ruling. You've got testimony from people inside the administration talking about obstruction and what's really happening behind closed doors. You've got her tied to the Epstein mess, which raises serious questions about judgment and fitness for executive authority. All of that goes directly into the impeachment case that Congress is building. It's not just he ignored a court order. It's he systematically defied the court, had his team help cover it up and obstruct justice, and his attorney general is so compromised that she can't even effectively defend the rule of law. That's a much stronger case. That's something that actually moves the needle with moderate Republicans who are worried about their own political futures. Moderate Republicans are getting nervous right now. They're looking at this ruling and thinking, oh no, because they're calculating what happens if Trump actually faces jail time, if he actually gets impeached by Congress, if he's actually in legal freefall and his whole administration is falling apart. What does that mean for their party? It means midterm disaster, probably. It means massive voter backlash. It means we spent 2 years defending this guy becomes a political liability instead of some kind of loyalty test. So you're going to start seeing cracks appear in the GOP coalition. You're going to see senators and representatives starting to distance themselves quietly, starting to say things like, well, the rule of law is important. Nobody's above the law. We need to respect the courts. That's political code for, we're thinking about abandoning this guy. That matters because Republican unity is what Trump has been relying on to stay in office and survive politically. If that breaks, everything changes. The 25th Amendment becomes a real serious conversation instead of just theoretical speculation. This gets real now because once you've got a president actively defying courts, a president having public meltdowns on camera in federal court, testimony about obstruction and corruption, people start asking the serious question, is this person actually fit to be president? Is this person mentally and emotionally capable of handling the job? The 25th Amendment allows the cabinet and Congress to essentially remove a president for being unfit. It's a nuclear option. It's almost never been seriously considered in American history. But if you've got a president screaming at judges, defying judicial authority, and potentially facing jail time, that conversation becomes real. It becomes something serious that people actually discuss. And if the Attorney General is too compromised to defend the rule of law, that becomes part of the fitness question. That becomes part of the narrative that this administration is breaking down and falling apart. Policy basically stops happening. When a president is facing real impeachment, criminal charges, and potential removal from office, Congress gets distracted from literally everything else. Legislative business grinds to a halt. You can't pass major legislation when everyone is focused on whether the president should even be in office anymore. That's actually a huge deal for the economy. That's a problem for healthcare. That's a problem for whatever Trump wanted to accomplish in his second term, because his legal disaster is paralyzing his entire agenda and policy operation. And this might be the most important one for what happens next. You've got the public opinion piece. Right now, Trump's favorability is already declining in measurable ways. The recordings hurt him. The scandals hurt him. And now you've got federal courts basically saying, this guy is not above the law. This guy has to follow the rules like everyone else. That lands really differently with regular voters than it lands with political insiders and lawyers, because normal people, regular Americans, they believe in rule of law. They believe courts should matter. They believe a president should follow court orders, because that's what a functioning society requires. Seeing Trump defy that, seeing him scream in court about it, seeing federal judges shut him down and say no more games, that registers as this guy is bad for America in a way that's visceral and real and connects with people emotionally. That's the needle mover for midterms. That's what actually changes election dynamics for real. So where does this go from here? Where is it heading? Impeachment votes start moving faster. The process accelerates. The 25th Amendment conversation becomes serious instead of hypothetical. GOP senators start calculating their own electoral survival and what supporting Trump costs them. Bondi becomes a bigger problem and liability because she's defending the indefensible. And Trump, he's got to prepare for jail time. He's got to prepare for potential removal from office. He's got to prepare for the reality that the legal system actually has teeth and actually enforces consequences on everyone equally. This ruling, this no more games moment, when the judge looked him in the eye and said, "You are not above the law," that was the turning point. That was the moment when the legal fortress collapsed. And what comes after that, what we're about to see, it's going to be wild. It's going to move fast. Because this isn't about political noise anymore. This isn't about media drama or campaign rhetoric. This is about actual constitutional consequences, actual criminal liability, actual real questions about whether a president can stay in office when he's openly defying courts and judges. That's the breakdown. That's what matters right now. And that's why this moment, this specific ruling, this specific federal judge looking Trump in the eye and saying, "You are not above the law," that's the exact moment when everything changed. That's the moment the delays ended. That's the moment consequences became real and immediate instead of theoretical and distant. The impeachment that follows, the 25th Amendment debate that's coming, the GOP meltdown that's going to happen, the public turning away from this administration, all of that flows directly from this court ruling, from a federal court saying no in a way that can't be appealed anymore. That's it.